Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I join others in wishing Muslims here and around the world Ramadan Mubarak? It's a month of fasting from sunrise to sunset, a month of reflection, thinking of those that are less fortunate, and a month of charity, and our thoughts are with all those living in poverty and in conflict at this time. I must say I'll have to battle dry mouth for 10 minutes. Fair play to the First Minister, who has to do it for 45 minutes this afternoon. Presiding Officer, it's been 4.5 years since the SNP government declared a drugs death emergency. Since then, over 5,200 lives have been lost in drug-related deaths. Every single one of them someone's son, daughter or loved one. In 2023 alone, 1,197 people died, a 10% increase on the previous year. And the response from the Drugs Minister this week was, the plan is working. But this is what Anne-Marie Ward, the CEO of Faber UK, said. They have the audacity to claim progress in this catastrophe. Their assertions are a slap in the face, a mockery of the grim reality we witness daily. How dare they feed us these blatant lies, expecting us to nod along while our communities are ravaged and our streets are lined with the casualties of their incompetence? Who is right? Are people impacted by drugs or the Drugs Minister?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, this government continues to engage with those who have lived experience and are on their recovery journey. The Drugs Minister and I did that just this week, just yesterday. We met with those with lived experience, those who are going through the recovery journey, not to spin, as has been suggested, but to directly front up what is an extremely challenging issue and to say that we continue not just to listen, but to act. And that's what I say to Anas Sarwar and to Douglas Ross, that nobody in the government, neither myself nor the Minister for Drugs and Alcohol Policy, nobody in this government is neither complacent nor at all attempting to dismiss the very serious concerns that have been raised by Douglas Ross, Anas Sarwar, by parliamentarians across this chamber and indeed by our stakeholders. But I can point to the fact that we are taking action. We are, for example, continuing to expand residential rehab. We are providing funding to community-based organisations. We are working with the likes of Glasgow City Council on more radical approaches like safer drug consumption facilities. So we're not just doing the same thing, we're looking to see what more we can possibly do that's different. We're widening the access to naloxone. We're driving the MAT standards. Everybody knows how important same-day access to treatment is and can be. We're working on the rights of those who have lived experience through the National Collaborative. If there are particular interventions that Anas Sarwar and others want us to explore and examine, I give him an absolute promise that we do so with an open mind. But nobody in government, not me nor the Drugs Minister, are downplaying what is one of the most serious issues our country is facing.
Anas Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, is repeated action of this government where we focus a lot on the inputs but we don't actually look at the outcomes of government policy. Because what matters here is the outcomes. And the outcome is more people losing their lives to drugs. In Tayside, 83 people died last year. In Edinburgh, it was more than 2 a week. And in Glasgow, it was 6 people a week. In January 2021, the government set out targets to increase residential rehab beds. They promised 225 more beds by 2026. 3 years on, only 32 are operational. In 2022, the government said it would establish drug checking facilities. But 2 years on, no facilities are open and not a single licence application has been made. In what world does the First Minister think this plan is working, and how can he expect families who have lost loved ones to believe him when there doesn't seem to be any sense of urgency?
First Minister.
Again, I reject the accusation that there isn't a sense of urgency. There absolutely is a sense of urgency. Anas Sarwar started his question by asking what the outputs were, and he's absolutely right. Outputs are important. There is an increase in residential rehab beds, and I'll come back to the very specific point that Anas Sarwar made just shortly. The outputs of our actions mean that we have now better standards, I would say more urgent standards when it comes to access to treatment. The outcomes are that we now have over 150,000 naloxone kits that have been distributed, and indeed we know from Police Scotland figures that they've been used, naloxone has been used around about 500 times, which undoubtedly has in itself save lives. That's an outcome and an output. In terms of course, checking facilities for drugs, and my understanding is that they require a Home Office licence, and that's why we continue to work with Glasgow City Council and indeed engage with the UK Government in this regard. And in relation to the point that Anas Sarwar makes, we are on track to meet our targets in relation to increased capacity of residential rehab. The investment that we've made is in 8 capacity projects that will provide an additional 172 beds by 25-26, and the further increasing further funding that we will provide in 25-26. We're very confident of meeting that 650 target by the end of the parliamentary term. I can give a breakdown in detail in writing if Anas Sarwar wishes of the investments that we made in residential rehab, but we are confident of not just meeting that target and output, but also the output on having 1,000 publicly funded rehab placements by, again, at the end of the Parliament.
Anas Sarwar.
The outcome that matters is that drugs deaths should be falling, not increasing. That's the outcome that really matters here. Because despite everything that the First Minister has said, we have the exact same drug laws as everywhere else in the UK, but almost 3 times as many drugs deaths here in Scotland. The outcome we need this government to deliver is fewer people dying from drugs, not more and more people dying every year. Because it's been 4.5 years since the SNP government declared a drugs death emergency. 3 years since the launch of their national mission to reduce drug deaths, and almost 2 years since the final report of the Drugs Death Task Force. But yet, in the last year, 1,197 more people have died. Incompetence has consequences. It means Scotland has the highest rate of drugs death in Europe. And across Scotland, families are grieving loved ones whose deaths were preventable. But this government has failed on every promise it has made. Promises to increase rehab beds falling behind. Promises on drug checking facilities not delivered. Promises on new treatment standards broken. But all we've heard today are more of those exact same promises that aren't being delivered and about a plan that is not working. Drug deaths are going up, not coming down. So I'll give him one last chance. What will he change to get a grip of this crisis and help save lives in Scotland?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, we know that there are many parts of the world, and of course right across the UK in particular, where there are challenges with synthetic opioids, nitazines, fentanyl, and so on and so forth, which are more addictive, more potent, and therefore causing real harm and real concern right across the United Kingdom. That's why Anas Sarwar and Douglas Ross were both right to say that levels of drug deaths in Scotland are unacceptable and per head of the population higher than other parts of the UK. But we have, of course, seen increases in England and Wales, and I suspect it's largely down to the same issues that we're facing collectively, that we're seeing more addictive substances on our streets, such as synthetic opioids. I do say once again to Anas Sarwar that not only are we taking action, he says promises have been broken around increasing residential rehab. They aren't. I'm giving Anas Sarwar the evidence, the detail, the facts, that the levels, the numbers of residential rehab beds have increased, and we are on track to meet our commitment towards the end of the Parliament. The same for publicly funded rehab places as well. And I can give an absolute guarantee, a promise to not just those in the chamber, but those that are listening, that where we can try innovative approaches, new approaches, then we will absolutely seek to do that. That's why we're supporting Glasgow with funding for their safer consumption room. It's why we're supportive of checking facilities for drugs and other interventions as well. And if we did have the power over the Misuse of Drugs Act, for example, we would seek to make changes in relation to the decriminalisation of drugs for personal use. And we would explore that issue because we know that intervention has worked in other countries. So I end, Presiding Officer, where I started. This government, of course, acknowledges the scale of the problem, the scale of the challenges, and rededicates itself to taking further action where we can, invest where we can, and work with anybody we possibly can to tackle this shameful and insidious problem in our society.